Okay, have we started recording?
Yeah,
Yes.
Doris.
All right, perfect. Okay, so hello and welcome everyone to our webinar today. Hi, our topic is Unlocking Literacy, Developing Skilled Reading in the Primary Classroom. Now, before we really begin, we'd like to share a few things with you first. Can you please change the slide? All right, so first comes our impact statement, which is that in English programs, our goal is high quality education systems for the teaching, learning, and assessment of English. So the strategic vision is to widen the knowledge and use of the English language around the world, thus empowering people to access global opportunities and connections. All right, so we'd like to just share a few tips on safeguarding, which is the next slide. I'm sure Rafid has already shared something with you. So what is really important to us is a safe and respectful environment. This means that we should share our opinion in a respectful way without bullying, harassment, or discrimination. If you have any concerns, you can always address those concerns via email. So you have the email in the contact address, and unacceptable behavior will result in us blocking you, stopping the chat. So we want to avoid that. Our responsibility is to support everyone to stop it from happening, prevent it, but I'm sure we won't have problems with you as our audience. I'm sure everybody will be respectful. All right, so thank you all. Now let's actually start. All right, so first we want to tell you a little bit about who we are, but we also would like to ask you to tell us who you are. So as we are introducing ourselves, we'd like to ask you to please type in the chat, tell us a little bit about who you are. So I can start. My name is Maya. I am a teacher and a teacher trainer. I've been working as an English teacher for around 10 years, and I've lived in different places around the world on 3 different continents, Bangladesh included, where I had a chance to spend 4 months with a TMT project, which was really exciting. All right, so our audience hopefully is typing in the chat, introducing yourselves. And Aksan, can you maybe share a little bit about who you are and what is it that you do?
Thank you, Maja. My name is Ahsan Habib. I'm a professor of education at the Institute of Education and Research in the University of Dhaka. And I have been working with education more than 18 years. So welcome all of you, and hope you'll enjoy this session.
Thank you. All right, so now we'll show you our main aims. So you can show us our three main aims for today's webinar. So first, we hope to tell you a little bit about the different elements of reading. So reading isn't this single thing that we do. It actually comprises different elements. So we hope to clarify these elements and why they are important. We are also aiming to look at some common challenges, both from the perspective of the teacher and learner, and the ways to overcome them. And finally, we are hoping to equip you with resources and strategies to support teaching reading. All right, so welcome everyone. Thank you for welcoming me, Jobeda. It was a pleasure talking to you last time. So hi everyone. Now, the last thing we want to share is participation. So you can click one more time. So we'd ask you as our audience to please participate throughout this webinar. So we have some questions for you that we'd like you to answer, and please share your thoughts, your comments, your suggestions in the chat. If you have some questions, you can keep them to the end of this webinar because we will have a Q&A session where we'll address your questions. But throughout, please participate, answer our questions. It will be our pleasure to know you a little bit. Hi, Purna. Nice to meet you. All right, so if I can ask just everyone to mute themselves, that would help us kind of stop the background noise. It would be perfect. All right, so we are actually beginning by asking you about your opinion on teaching reading. So if you are a teacher, can you please answer our question from the poll over here? How do you feel about teaching reading? Type A, B, C, or D in the chat. So A, if you enjoy it, but you think it's easy. B, if you like it, but think it can be challenging. C, if it's not your favorite, but you manage, and D, if you think it's quite difficult. So please write A, B, C, or D, depending on your opinion. All right, as our audience is typing, Ahsan, can you maybe tell me, do you have children? And if you do they like reading?
Yes, I have a daughter and she likes reading a lot.
How old is your daughter?
She's now grade 10, but she
Mm-hmm.
started reading when she was in elementary. And she's a
Okay.
wide variety of reading practice.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. What about you? Do you personally enjoy reading?
Yeah, I like reading a lot, and I don't mind reading anything from
Okay.
newspaper to, whatever in the, yeah, whatever I got anywhere, anything.
Okay, we are quite alike then. I also enjoy reading, and I can read pretty much anything.
I like
But
it,
of
but
course,
it can be challenging.
go ahead. Yeah.
I like it, but it can be challenging. B.
Okay, perfect, perfect. All right, so you can type it in the chat. I think most of you actually agree with B. Most of you said B, you like it, but it can be challenging. If somebody asked me, I would have chosen the same answer. But we have across the board, we have some people who think it's easy, others who think it's difficult. Most of you like it, but think that there are some problems with it. All right, so let's jump into it. Let's see what it is. So can we move to the next slide? Okay, so at the very beginning, when I introduced those aims, I mentioned that reading isn't really this one thing. So we can talk about 5 pillars of reading or 5 elements of reading. And these 5 elements are here, as you can see. So we have, for instance, phonemic awareness, which is the ability to hear and manipulate sounds in words. We also have phonics, which is the connection between sounds and letters. So to kind of understand the difference between numbers 1 and 2, you can think of words cat and mat, which we'll have later on as our examples. So phonemic awareness would be the ability to hear the difference between the words cat, mat. They are minimal pairs. They're only differentiated by one sound, right? They have one different sound. So to be able to hear and understand that they are different sounds. And phonics would be, for instance, if you show your students 2 words, cat, mat, and you say the word and they choose the correct word written. So connecting the written form with a sound. Also, we have vocabulary, which is knowing the word, understanding words and using them correctly. We have fluency, which is reading smoothly without hesitation. And we have comprehension, which is understanding what's been read. So all 5 of these are actually what we mean when we say reading. They're all necessary. So again, a question for the audience. When you teach reading, which of these elements do you usually focus on? So you can write the number 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Which do you focus on? Tell us in the chat. Ahsan, are you familiar with 5 pillars of reading?
Yeah, if I understand from your description, do you think that that's the reason we don't understand when cow is mooing or dogs are barking? It all sounds same to us. Because when we difference the sounds, then we can understand what they are. So that's why
Exactly.
children probably need to differentiate the different sounds, so they can say this is one vocabulary, that is the other one.
Yeah,
So sandbag,
exactly.
probably not a bad moon, or bathroom, not bad moon. So the
Yeah.
more the sound children can different, the more aware of their about the vocabulary, they can learn faster. Am I right?
You are absolutely right. And I think all the teachers listening to you can kind of think back to some situation when the children didn't really hear or understand what you were saying. Well, maybe they mixed those similar sounding sounds. So what I would ask the teachers to type in the chat, which of these elements do you focus on? My guess or my idea would be that maybe on lower levels, we tend to cover more things like 1, 2, and 3. And then maybe when our students are a little bit older, we'll look at 4 and 5, for example. Aksan, do you think that that would be right? Are all these elements, are they all taught at the same level? Is there a difference in complexity or how we develop?
I think we should start from phonemic awareness, and then the more we understand, the age goes by, and then we go for the more comprehension.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. So maybe it becomes more complex, right, with age. All right, let's move on to the next slide. So maybe this metaphor will help everyone understand the 5 pillars, because we'll be talking about them a lot, right? So we can think about 5 pillars as pillars supporting a house. So if one is weak, then it compromises the whole house. Everything can collapse because they all depend on one another. So for instance, if you don't have phonemic awareness, and this is very similar to Aksan, to what you said, right? If you cannot really understand the difference between the words, if you can't hear the difference, it's very hard to build vocabulary. And if you don't build vocabulary, how can you reach the comprehension stage? So they're all connected. So we can think about this as all of them supporting this house that we call reading. So I hope this metaphor will kind of clarify things for everyone. All right, let's look at the next slide. All right, so let's talk a little bit about challenges when teaching reading. So I would ask our audience to type. Can you tell us what problems with reading do you have, or do your learners have? Share some thoughts with you. Here are some ideas from experience that I had. So for instance, some of the challenges with teachers are limited resources. So this can actually mean different things. It can mean everything from outdated reading materials, not having enough exercises covering different aspects of reading, materials maybe not being interesting for our learners, not age appropriate, and so on. We can also talk about limited focus. What I mean here is focusing only on one of those elements, only on one pillar. Let's say maybe we aim everything at comprehension and we don't really bother with some of the other ones, or maybe we spend most of our exercises trying to develop fluency and not thinking about all the elements. One aspect for all teachers, me included, can be like lack of training. If we don't have access to training, to hear what the best practices are, to share some ideas with our colleagues, to hear good experience from other teachers. Also classroom size, maybe our students are in big classes, it's very hard to hear, to focus, to concentrate, and so on. So can you, our teachers in the chat, type what problems do you have? Do you have some of the problems I wrote about? Do you have some other problems? We can also look at learner challenges while our audience is hopefully typing. So usually teachers' challenges and learners' challenges are connected, right? So we all share the same problems. For our learners, maybe they don't feel motivated because the materials are not interesting, or maybe they're too challenging, maybe they're too difficult for them. Maybe they don't really know what they're supposed to do. Or as we already mentioned, maybe it's too noisy for them to focus on reading. We can also talk about the lack of clear focus. So when we mix the wrong activity for an element that we are trying to teach. For instance, you can think about if we ask our student to read something aloud. So they're speaking, right? They're reading the text. And when they finish, we ask them, so what's the text about? So that's a comprehension question, but the fluency activity. And it can be very hard for our students to answer that question. even for us, you can notice if you are reading out loud, it can be very difficult for you to focus on the content. So not really mixing the activity with the element can also cause lots of problems for our learners. Aksan, from your perspective, what are some challenges that learners have from the developmental point of view? What can you share with us?
Okay. Before going for the developmental part, I want to say that when you talk about limited resource, I also said the inappropriate resources. Like children naturally should have a certain amount of vocabulary by themselves from their surroundings, from their context, from their family and communities. But what happened that our textbooks sometimes cannot connect those vocabularies into the reading materials. That's why some of the words they're not familiar, and some of the familiar words they're not in the reading books. So that's also sometimes showing that they're not getting interested or they don't find it very understandable. That's why that's one of the problem of reading materials. And
That's
for
a very, very
developmental
good point.
perspective, yeah, developmental perspective, we have some research in Bangladesh context. We said that reading fluency in Bangladesh is 22 per minute, words per minute, which is really very low from international standard.
Okay, very, very good point. And I also saw that some of our audience wrote that most students are not able to read fluently because they lack resources and teachers training. What you said about the vocabulary kind of not being maybe appropriate, not included in the text, so then we are kind of making things maybe too challenging for our learners, among other things, which can be very demotivating and very confusing as well. So that's one of the problems with the resources that we have. Absolutely. We also have somebody wrote lack of knowledge in English. Yeah, so definitely, if we are aware of our learners' problems, then we can act on them. Just a note on these challenges, right? So we divided them into like teachers and learners challenges, but we should also look at the challenges from the perspective of those that we can influence and those that are outside of our sphere of influence. So for example, if I look at classroom size, which can be a problem, it's not really something that I as a teacher can have an impact on, right? So the teachers unfortunately can't decide if their classroom are going to have 50 students or not. That's outside our hands. However, we can impact some of these things. So for instance, if we look at limited resources, which is the problem that we all have, doesn't matter what the books are, we usually have something to improve there. It is something that we can have an influence on. So those are the things we can change. So today we are hopefully trying to change the things that we can. All right, let's move on and look at the next slide that we have. Okay, so today for the next part of the webinar, we'll try to deal with the problems that we have by using a 4-step strategy. So I divided it into 4 steps to make it easier to understand, to make it more approachable. It's very logical, really. So the first step would be to identify our learners' needs. So we said there are different elements of reading. It's not just one thing. So we should identify which element is the problem, right? That's the first step. Then second one, understanding the materials. So from the materials that we do have, our textbooks, everything that's at our disposal, what do we have there, right? Which of the exercises are covering which of those elements, right? If I want to improve my learners' comprehension or phonemic awareness, which activity in my book is aimed at doing that? Then we look at using targeted activities and instructions. So once we've identified the right activity in the book, we can use it. There are also easy ways to extend it, right? So we don't want to waste a lot of time. We are all busy. We have many classes, many students. So we won't create all new materials, but there are some very simple ways in which we can extend the materials that we already have without spending too much time or effort in doing that. And finally, we want to use appropriate assessment. So if we are aiming to develop one element, we want to make sure that we actually are checking that element. All right, so let's dive into it.
Something with
absolutely.
one point that
Sure.
From developmental perspective, as a psychologist, I may say that all children don't grow their language development the same way. So that teacher need to accept that my students in my class, they shouldn't achieve everything in the same time. Some develop their language faster than others. So that's one thing we need to consider when we teaching or we are designing instructional strategies.
Thanks very much for that. It's an excellent point, right? So just understanding that everybody is different and we have the same materials, but there are different ways to kind of individualize them without, again, spending too much time. Because if we have a big classroom of 40 students, it's so hard to kind of to individualize every single activity. But there are simple ways in which we can tweak our activity so that we provide support for our weaker students, or maybe we challenge our stronger students. And as you said, we as teachers should all accept that we're all different, absolutely from the developmental perspective, but also, I mean, I spend a lot of time teaching adults as well. So we are really all different. We're all really individuals. So what's easy for one is difficult for others, and that's normal, right? So we shouldn't worry too much about it or stress over it. To have everyone on the same level is a very hard goal to achieve. All right, perfect. Let's have a look at our first step then, identifying our learners' needs. So there are different ways in which we can do that, different tests and assessments that we can do at the beginning, throughout, and so on. Probably the easiest, most natural way to assessing what my students need is to ask yourself, what are my students struggling with? Right? So match the problem with the element. So I would like to ask the audience to type in the chat. We have 3 problems. A, sounding words. So let's say you have the word cat. You ask the students, sound the word. We have B, identifying the gist of the text. So understanding what the main idea of the text is. And C, summarizing the text. So these 3 things are the problems for your students. Can you match the problem with the element it is linked? So A would be a match with what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. B, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Can you share, what do you think, right? So open the chat and type the match as you think it is. Okay, so Ahsan, looking at the problems, what do you think about these problems? Are they common problems for learners? Are they equally complex? What do you think?
I think they're equally complex because students coming from different backgrounds, so they have issues with their pronunciation, what extent they are familiar with the sounds. So those things definitely has impact on their understanding of phonemic awareness or the phonics. And the other 2 things is also related to their vocabulary, right? And if they are not enough vocabulary, they will definitely have enough reading materials or enough chance to read around. They may have those problems in their classroom reading practice.
Yeah. We also have some audience answers over here. So Mubina wrote 1 is A. Mubina, you're absolutely right? So
yes,
sounding words would be a good link with phonemic awareness. If anybody is thinking phonics here as well, that could be a good match too. B, what would you say B, so this is the question for our audience, B and C, what would you match that with? Identifying the gist of the text, summarizing the text. Is it more phonics? Is it more vocabulary? Is it more comprehension? So as an audience, what would you say? B and C are a match with, so our audience is writing. So Tangela is writing C is 5. And we also have Rumani answering similar. So yeah, well done. So identifying the gist, summarizing would maybe be more higher level comprehension. Of course, we also need vocabulary there to support that comprehension. So if you thought vocabulary here as well, you're absolutely right. Janat wrote 3, 4, and 5 for B and C, which is absolutely right. Of course, it's never just one element. It's a combination of more. Okay, so thanks everyone for writing this. So yeah, this is our step number 1, identifying the problem and then matching it with the right element. So that's the first step. Now let's have a look at another step. So let's move to the next slide. Okay, so this is again a little task for the audience. So for the next slides, we have some tasks for you over here. So we have 2 exercises taken from English for Today class 4. I guess a lot of the teachers here are teaching the same book. Probably they're familiar with the exercises. So again, if you can click maybe 2 more times on this slide. Again, I'd like to remind you that we have those 5 elements that we are talking about. Ahsan, can you maybe just click 2 times? Perfect. All right. Yes. So excellent. Thanks. I got it. I see it. So which elements are these reading exercises aiming to develop? So again, open the chat and with number 1, write whatever you think is a good match, phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, whatever, and do the same for number 2, right? So 2 different exercises from the book. Which reading elements do you think these exercises are trying to develop? All right, so Ahsan, are you familiar? Sorry, I was muted there for a second. I don't know why, we had a problem. So Ahsan, you're also muted if you are not aware of it. I think it's something that happens automatically. So you can unmute yourself when you solve. Okay, perfect. All right, now you're unmuted. So my question was for Ahsan, are these materials the same materials that your daughter is using? And is this different from what you had when you were a child? How are the materials different? And hopefully our audience in the meantime is matching. So number 1 is a match with 1 element, number 2 is a match with another element. Please type in the chat. Ahsan, what's your experience with the book?
I think it has been long years, right? So definitely the materials are not the same now. But you know what happened? I think that the materials right now is like more improved, more connected. But problem is that sometimes we didn't understand what the materials we have in our hand and how they are connected to with the elements you're talking about, the skills or competency are connected. So this is one of the nice exercise that what we have, and how can we use those materials for getting these skills.
Yeah. As you said, I think it's one of the problems for all of us, because nobody really teaches you how to read and understand the textbook that you have, right? So if it's a problem for our teachers today participating, if you have never really thought about it, that's normal, because I didn't think about it at first too. But then later, as you participate in more professional development, you learn more, you understand some things more. So this is our second step. We are aiming to understand the materials we are using and match them with the things we are trying to kind of work on. So our audience wrote over here some good answers that we had. So number one, comprehension, well done. So Shamser Sardar said, no, sorry, Asif Ahmed said, number one is comprehension. You're absolutely right.
Good.
So number one is comprehension. If anybody thought maybe vocabulary as well, sure, that would be like a good secondary aim of this exercise. So comprehension and building the vocabulary. We also had number two. Number two was, so Tanjila Akhtar said number one for vocabulary. So Tanjila, yes, that's one of the aims with comprehension as well. And number two for conversation, good. So if you look at our elements over there, the closest one that we have for conversation would be fluency. So yeah, fluency maybe would be the main aim of number two, because as Tanjila rightly pointed out, this exercise is mainly used for conversation. So we ask our students, okay, now together, role play, right? Role play this. So we are trying to kind of build their fluency, their conversation skills. All right, thanks for participation, everyone. Let's look at the next slide. So I have two more exercises for you to match. Okay, you can click, perfect. So numbers 3 and number 4, this one is taken from a lower level. This is English for Today, class 1. If you can just go back one slide, perfect. All right, so again, number 3 is a match with what? Number 4 is a match with what? Can you please type in the chat? While our audience hopefully is matching these elements, Ahsan, so you mentioned different backgrounds for students being one of the problem. It's also like usually the differences between your mother tongue and
Yes.
the language you're trying to learn. So what are the differences between English and Bangla? How are they different?
I think they're very different in a varied way, but not only that that English and Bangla, but also within Bangla, students coming from different background, which also they have issues with the accent. So that's very much goes with the sound. So in Bangladesh, there are different regions have a different accent, though you are using the same language. So that also sometimes influence the sound, making sound. Yeah.
To make things more difficult for learners and for teachers, especially if you as a teacher have students from different backgrounds in one classroom, then they all have like different problems possibly. Yeah. It can be a big issue. All right, so our audience are writing we have some good answers over here. Conker wrote phonemic awareness. Yes, absolutely, right? So Mubina Akhtar wrote number 3, vocabulary. So Mubina, yes, it is definitely vocabulary is one of the aims. We can also say phonemic awareness, and I will tell you in a second why. So we'll look at some activities. So for number 3, phonemic awareness, as Zara Jinat said, which is absolutely right. But Mubina with vocabulary, that's one of the aims as well. So you are not wrong for saying that. Number 4, so number 4, we had again phonics, right, or phonemic awareness and phonics as well. So I'd just like to draw your attention to number 4 and the phrasing of it. So it says, look at the picture, say the word, say the first sound. So here, it depends on how if we think about the difference between the sound and the letter, right? So if we look at the first picture, it's a tiger. So what is it that you're expecting of your student? Are you expecting the student to say the letter, which is T, or are you expecting the student to say the sound? Because the letter and the sound are not the same. They don't say tiger, they say tiger. So the first sound is a t, not a t. T is spelling of a letter and t is a sound that we actually hear. So we'll talk a little bit more about this really soon, because that's the essence of us teaching phonics and phonemic awareness. First step, differentiating between the letters and the sounds. So when we are talking about the sounds, we are not really expecting our students to spell the letters. All right, so perfect. Let's move on to the next slide and see what we have there. Okay, so far what we had was, number one, understand our learners' needs by looking at the problems that they have. Okay, so if they are having problems sounding the word, it's probably related to phonics. Then the next step is looking at our books and understanding which exercise is covering which element so that we can use the right exercise to develop the element we are trying to develop. That's what we have covered so far. But we said that one of the biggest problems that we have is that our resources are limited. So our book can have nice exercises, and once we can identify them correctly, we can use them, but they're often not enough. So we said that we will look at some ways to extend the exercises, and hopefully in a simple way, so that we don't spend time, energy, and so on developing extra materials, because nobody really has time to do that. So just a reminder, we said that this activity is aiming to develop mostly phonemic awareness and phonics. And yes, definitely we are building the vocabulary as well. But the main aim is our phonemic awareness and phonics. So some activities that we can do with our students is sound the letters. So we said sounding is not the same as spelling the letters. So we'll take example of two words, cat and mat. So what you can do is you can create these letter cards that I'm showing to you right now, right? We have some simple letter cards. If you don't want to do it, you can ask your students to do it, right? So you can give them some writing practice. So take a piece of paper, write a letter. Sounding is different from spelling. If you spell it, you say C-A-T. That's not what we're talking about here. So sounding would be to say the sound of the letter. So k, ke, ke, t, k, e, t, et, at, mat. So you're sounding the letters and students are repeating this chorally, right? So it's very different sounding and spelling. So it's a difference between a C and a K. So if you have a cat and a mat, if you spell the letters, you're not really showing the students how they are so similar, right? So if students are saying C-A-T, M-A-T, it's not the same as cat mat, right? So cat mat. If this is challenging or maybe daunting, because I know that a lot of teachers I worked with said, oh, but we are kind of not sure how to sound the letters. Don't worry. Later on in this webinar, we have a resources section where I've included some YouTube videos where you can, in a very easy way, learn how to sound the letters. So it's not a difficult activity. It can be really fun for you as teachers, and it can be very helpful for learners. Hassan, can you maybe share with our audience, why would it be more helpful to sound the letters rather than to spell the letters?
Yeah, I mean, if we don't practice the sound and start with the sound, then I think we'll not get used to with our vocal cord and also our listening power. That was the difference between two different sounds. And in Bangladesh, mostly what we practice that we start with the letter, and that's why many of the words we mispronounced because of that wrong strategies.
Yeah, right. So it can lead to maybe mispronouncing, and even if it doesn't have a negative impact, it doesn't really help our students to link the visual with the sound, and building that link can be very helpful later on. That's what we said in phonemic awareness, the ability to hear and then manipulate the sound. So our students, when they see this later on, this combination, they'll have an expectation of ka, which is very helpful because a lot of CAs is a ka sequence, so it can help. So as I said, some people are writing, you must know sounds of the English alphabet, which is true, but you don't have to worry about that being too difficult. We'll share some materials to kind of to build that skill, and it can be a new thing for us if we haven't used that before, but don't be daunted. If you don't feel ready to use that right now, you don't have to use that. So there are other activities to do to build phonemic awareness and phonics that can be very simple. So again, if you have letter cards, you can say the word, just cat, mat, and your student have different letters on their desks, right? And they have to quickly write the word using the letter. So you can make it into a game. Groups put the letters in the right order to create different words, cat or mat or whatever. So they have to be able to hear the word to write it correctly. You can also maybe say the word and students tap a picture if you have pictures, right? Or you can draw simple pictures on the blackboard. You can say the word and students have to draw a picture. So all of these activities are very simple and they make it easy for you to practice phonemic awareness and phonics with your students. Okay, so I hope that some of these activities are familiar to you, and I hope that for some others, maybe you'll try using them in your classrooms later on. Okay, let's have a look at some other aspects, some other element. Okay, you can click more. All right. So we looked at phonemic awareness and phonics. Let's look at fluency, for example. So here again we showed that the role play. So we said, okay, so probably the main aim of this would be to build fluency. So there are some different ways to do it. So of course we probably ask our students to read out loud to build fluency. Maybe we ask them to practice the conversation together, to role play, all great activities. Again, there are some easy ways to extend that, to use different activities. So for instance, we have the reader's theater. So you can create a theater, make a stage, have your students act out. Let them be actors. So that will add more fun to it. And by putting them in the context, it will actually make it easier for them to get into the role. Another activity is timed reading. So what you need for this is some kind of a watch or a clock on the wall, mobile phone, stopwatch, your watch, whatever. And then you ask a student to read the same text several times. But the goal is for the student to read the text in less time the other times that they do it, right? So each time they're getting faster and faster. You can also make it into a game, right? So that's great for building fluency. You can use reading rhythms. You don't need anything to do it. You can use your hands to clap or clap on the desk, on the board, wherever. You can have the whole class clapping and ask the students to read following the rhythm. Again, you can make the rhythm faster and faster. It can be great fun for students and they're building their fluency. We also have choral reading, so students reading a passage or a poem in groups. You can have the whole class split, divided into different groups. Each group reads a part like of a poem or something. That can also be a fun activity for students. If you'd like, maybe you can share some experience in the chat. Have you ever tried any of these activities? Would you like to try any of these activities? And Ahsan, so your daughter who loves reading, what is her method to practice fluency? In what way does she do it?
Okay, I mean, I don't know what she did in her classroom, but what I think that I see that sometimes she reads very fast. She skips the words and is more about getting into the story rather to think about the words. So initially I was worried about that, but now I think it was okay. If you find a word hard or not very familiar, you skip it and go for the next word and then go make your reading faster. and try to get the main gist out of the paragraph or the text.
Yeah, absolutely. So your daughter was probably, as you said, aiming to understand the text rather than to just read every word. So that's absolutely natural. I mean, I guess the reading comprehension is the number one thing that we generally use reading for in our everyday life. So that's great. But you also pinpointed an important problem that may be a part of trying to read fast, and that is like skipping words and so on. So that's why fluency building slowly but surely is important. We have some audience comments. So Tangela likes readers theater reading rhythms. Asif mentioned that he'd like to try reading rhythms. You should. It's a really fun activity. The students tend to like it a lot. Okay, Purna said role play. Absolutely, role play is. So role play and readers theater are just like one extra activity. Pretty much you're doing the same thing. You're just doing it in a little more dramatic way so the students have more fun. All right, so I hope that you like the activities, that you try some of them. Students enjoy them and teachers sometimes too. All right, let's have a look at another element. Okay, so the last thing we'll talk about is comprehension. You'll notice that I skipped vocabulary, and I skipped it because I think a lot of you are very familiar with teaching vocabulary through different methods such as cards or pictures or real objects. So I didn't see the big need to kind of cover that with extra ideas, but feel free to share if you have a particularly interesting idea about vocabulary, please share it with us. I'm sure a lot of you are more than competent enough to deal with vocabulary. All right, so comprehension, again, we are looking at the activity that we looked at before. The goal is comprehension, and we said maybe also building vocabulary. So one activity that is in general useful for any kind of higher level activities is asking your students to predict the topic, just because it helps them later on with the comprehension. So if they already have the prediction, they activate their previous knowledge of the topic, it can be easier for them to understand what's happening, rather than if you give them something to read without them knowing anything about what they should expect. Some other activities include summarizing the text or choosing the best title for the text. So this one includes you creating 3 titles or 5 titles or whatever it is, or you can have 2 titles. And the students have to choose the best one to show that they understand the main idea of the text. Summarizing, again, very complex, but to show the comprehension of the gist of the main idea of the text. You can ask the students to write the best title, or you can ask the students, if you have a longer text, which is divided into different paragraphs, you can ask your students to write subheading for each paragraph. That way, they are showing to you that they understand what the main point of that paragraph is, right? So those are all different ways in which we can check comprehension. You can ask the students to put the events of the story in order. That can be in text or even in pictures if you have time to create those. So like all different activities to check. Aksan, if you look at this list of comprehension activities, which one would you say are maybe the highest level, the most complex from the developmental perspective?
I think that to do the summarization of a text, sometimes students are lack of vocabularies, so they cannot do it, but also they feel shy to express it. So that point of view, I think we can make it interesting, some of the interesting activities that can help not only to understand their comprehension, but to help themselves, the students, to get the whole story. For example, what I did practice in the last week with students with hearing impaired. What happened that I asked them that I see that my student teachers, they're struggling with comprehension of a text, of a story. So then I asked them to make a graphical timeline with the keywords. So you can the whole story of 2 pages, you can make it with 1 or 2 words, and then give the arrow sign and go for the next keywords. So what's the story timeline going on. So that was very interesting, and the students find it very, very interesting. And because they don't have to use the sentences, they just can draw picture and use some of the keywords. And another thing is, yeah.
No, I just want to say such a great idea. I will use your activity next time. Absolutely. I love it. Yeah. Okay. Tell us about the next thing that you wanted to say.
Yeah. Okay. And another thing you can, with the same thing, we can do that if before the class, if we are planning to have a story in the next class, we can do some of those major storylines in separate small papers and ask the student to do it in a do the sequence. So that also helped them to understand the text.
Yeah. Perfect. Thanks so much for adding to this list of really useful activities. Great ideas. Yes. I'm sure the teachers will try it, but I'll definitely try it. I love it. Okay, we also have some audience comments. So we have Purna Roybom likes the titling. Okay, I'm glad that you like the idea. We have a question from Chaknaz Mahmouda. Oh no, you said, in my classroom, I let the students find out the new words before starting a new lesson. It helps them to read. Absolutely right. So I didn't include it over here, but you're absolutely right. We should pre-teach the vocabulary. If we think that in the text that the students are going to read, they will face some comprehension issues because of the new vocabulary. Absolutely. So that's essential, right? So that's a great comment. Thanks, Shaknaz. Okay, we had a question. So 1 second. Okay, so Manar wrote, my problem with teaching reading is that my students are in grade 5 and they don't know the sounds and many of the common words. How can I solve this? Well, I have a long story to finish. Yeah, that's a really good question. And there is no easy answer to this. I'd say it goes back to our original step 1, that is identifying the problem. So in that case, the problem is vocabulary, right? So you said there are many common words that they don't know, maybe some sounds as well, so phonemic issues. So then you have to kind of start with that. So as Shahnaz mentioned, pre-teach the vocabulary. So I know that if we are on a limited timeline and we need to cover something, but if our students are struggling, we cannot really cover it without covering the bases. So then I would say, don't do the reading, take one lesson before the text and just cover the vocabulary from that lesson. Sometimes it will require half a lesson, sometimes it will require maybe a full lesson. So just do that thing first and then move on to the longer reading for comprehension. If you don't cover the first problem, you won't be able to deal with the actual reading. So Aksan, is there anything that you want to add to this question, or do you agree?
Yeah, I think what she was mentioning, I think is many of the teachers' words, because I told you the story in the study you have done, that we've seen that the fluency of the students is very low compared to particularly in the rural areas. And then we can complain about that, but that will not help. So it happened to me even in the last week when I went to my student teacher to see the student teacher in a hearing impaired school, and the students are complaining that their basic foundation is very poor, very low, very weak. I mean, you can say that, but what you will do with that? So that is out of control. So what we can do, that what they have from that, as you say, that we can start from there and then try to improve in whatever way you can do. So that could be a good starting, rather feeling frustrated.
Yeah. I mean, it's very hard not to be frustrated if you have materials level X and then students level Y, and you have to match those two. But yeah, you listen to your students because you are not teaching the materials, you're teaching your students. So we try to kind of combine the best of two worlds. That's why we expand our materials with different activities to help our students. But yes, absolutely. I know that it's one of the biggest problems that teachers have and learners have as well. All right, let's have a look at the next slide. So we are finished with targeted activities. So final step, hopefully after identifying the problem, looking at the materials that we have in the book and matching the problem with the right material, and then extending the materials to include maybe different activities to help support that element, we are getting to assessment. So what we mean by assessment, appropriate assessment is the one that effectively checks the elements we are aiming to develop. So there are different aspects to this. Here I showed you some effective and ineffective practices. They are pretty much different sides of the same coin, right? So for instance, effective would be that questions and tasks are element specific. So, you know, if you are teaching, if you're aiming to teach phonics, your materials are also teaching phonics, right? So you don't have mismatch there. Another thing would be to provide enough time for our students to do the task, to respond, right? So usually we are limited, we are short on time. Everybody's struggling with trying to cover a lot, but not having enough time to do it. But it's better to give our students enough time to actually complete the task well than to rush through 5 tasks without anybody understanding what is happening. We should use different assessment types. So we mentioned, Aksan pointed out a really important thing, that everybody is different. People are different. Some people are very shy to speak, as we know, as adults, let alone children. So sometimes maybe written assessment would be better than spoken one, right? For instance. Also adapting to individual needs in different ways. So if you have weaker students struggling, allow them to be helped by other students. Put them in pairs or in groups to provide peer assessment for them, peer support, for them, so they can help each other learn from one another. Also, you can increase the challenge level if you have very strong students by, for instance, asking them open-ended questions and so on. So ineffective practices could be all the opposite of what I've just said. So when you don't match the questions and tasks well, if you don't give students enough time to respond. Also, one useful tip for you as teachers, if you're asking questions orally, would be, that's what my mentor told me, would be to wait for 5 seconds before you say anything else, right? So if you ask your student, you ask them a question and your student is silent, we have this strong need to fill the silence. So resist it, right? Don't say anything. Allow the time for students to gather their thoughts to tell you something. We use only one type of assessment. We don't take into account individual needs. All of those would be ineffective practices. Aksan, is there anything you'd like to add, or maybe our audience would like to share some of their ideas?
Yes, I mean, while they're sharing, I'm just adding something. I will pick the teachers use the different assessment types. It is not good news because with the new curriculum, because earlier in our school system, we only assess 2 skills, writing and reading, and never with speaking and listening. And so with the new curriculum, we have chances to measure or assess all 4 skills and give credit to the students. And one more thing is about that with the different assessment system, because we know that some of the students who are introvert may not speak up, but they're very good at writing. So this different type of assessment can help us to, improve their English skills.
Yeah, I'm very glad to hear about the new curriculum, and developing things so that we can assess our students better. That's definitely definitely essential. We had an important, we had a question. Okay, I saw it a little bit before scanning. So we had a question about scanning from Purna Roy. Can we do scanning before comprehension? Yes, right. But think about what scanning is for. So usually when we talk about scanning, we are looking for specific information. So yes, when you have, for instance, a comprehension task that is asking you to find specific information in the text, then you ask the students to scan the text to find the specific information. Skimming, on the other hand, would be go to the text quickly to find out the main idea of the text. So it depends on what kind of questions you have ready for your students. If you're asking them to find specific information, then scanning. If you're asking them to just see what the main idea of the text is, then we would have like skimming, going quickly through the text. Okay, we have comments. Peer support is very important for us. Absolutely. Okay, great. Now let's see the conclusion so that we can wrap things up a little bit. Just the next slide.
Sorry.
Oh, no, sorry. My apologies. One more thing that I promised you before the conclusion is the resources section. So in the resources here, we have some online links for you to follow. So if you'd like to know more about phonemic awareness and phonics, how to sound the letters of the alphabet, things like that, there are actually many channels on YouTube, for example. Here I shared two. One is from Little Learners videos. I showed that one to the teacher trainees that we worked with, and they all liked it. So it's really useful. So they show you like letters of the alphabet matched with some common words on lower levels, like cat, mat, whatever, and they sound it. So you can listen and repeat it. It's very useful. You can play it for your students. Another site which is great for reading materials, for online games, for printable resources, and I really highly recommend it, is actually the site from the British Council, Learn English Kids. So there you can find really different kinds of materials that are great for your students. And if there are any teachers here who are maybe teaching teens, they also have teens site as well, right? So you can find lots of materials there. And finally, we said that one of the problems is the lack of training. So there are great professional development courses online. Two of them are also by the British Council on this very same topic, so teaching reading. We had one already, but I'm pretty sure you can access it. This one supporting literacy. We had different speakers talking about different aspects of reading skills and literacy in general. There is another webinar coming up on teaching English through literature, which is also very interesting. They're both on the British Council events, so you can check on their website. All right, so this is from the resources section. Aksan, is there any resource that you'd like to recommend the audience to kind of have a look at?
No, it's fine. I don't have, I think it's more.
Okay, all right. Now let's see the conclusion to wrap things up. Okay, so you can, right. So we started by saying that reading isn't really one thing. So we have a variety of elements, all of which need to be developed to create that house that is strong and supported. We said that those 5 pillars of reading include phonemic awareness, phonetics, vocabulary fluency, and comprehension. We looked at some common problems, both from teachers' perspective and learners' perspective. And we also said that it's important to differentiate between the problems we can influence and the ones we cannot, that are out of our hands. So we want to work on the things we can fix. To develop skilled reading, we talked about a 4-step strategy. So we said that the first step is to identify what our learners' needs are by looking at what their problems are. Then we need to understand the materials that we have. So our textbooks, exercises dealing with reading, what element are they actually teaching? Then choosing the right activity for the element and expanding that with different and simple, easy to do activities. And finally, we said using appropriate assessment to check if we are actually developing what we said that we would want to develop. Finally, we looked at a list of resources, and our suggestion is embrace the digital age. There are some wonderful resources available online to help yourself and to help, of course, your learners, which is our ultimate aim. All right, this is our conclusion. Now we'd like to share on the next slide one link with you. So if you can just move on to the next slide. So this is a feedback link for today's webinar. I think Rafid will share this link with you in the chat. And also, if you have any questions that we didn't answer, please type your answer in the chat so that we can answer your questions. But we also ask you to please complete the link that's on the screen. And okay, we also had some comments. I will kind of go through the comments while you are completing the link, maybe typing some questions for us. So Mohammed Nassar Uddin said, I guess the assessment is very important to check our students' abilities. Maybe it would be pair work, individual work, question and answer orally. Yes, absolutely, right? So combining different types of pair system, right? So that we don't just have our students work individually. Not only that it provides peer support and mutual learning, but it's also more enjoyable for students sometimes when they have a partner to work with. Okay, we have lots of thanks. So we are most welcome and thank you. We have Rumin Akhtar saying, gallery work, jigsaw reading, running dictation, excellent ideas. I didn't touch on all of these activities. We have lots of great activities and you just mentioned some of them. So we had great fun with running dictation. That's a really, really great idea. Jigsaw reading, absolutely, especially for higher levels, you're welcome. All right, so no additional questions at this moment. I think then that's it. I think we are finished. I hope everybody found this webinar useful. Your comments were really helpful to us, so thank you for participating via chat. And that's it. I really hope you found the session useful.